indeed. Well, welcome everyone to this webinar, an introduction and an overview to the Orange Cyberdefense Security Navigator, Discovering the Navigator 2024. My name is Charl from the Vault. I'm the Global Head for Security Research here at Orange Cyberdefense. Myself and my team are largely responsible for putting this report together. And so it's really a privilege for us to be able to join you here today to talk about the report and help you find your way around it. The report is published every year by us in November. It's a multi-team effort led by my team, but with contributions from all across our business, data from all across our business. And it's a sincere effort by myself and my colleagues to really capture the unique and useful insights that we can gather from our operations, from the work my team does, and from the data we collect. This webinar in particular is positioned as an introduction and an overview. The report is about 180 pages long, so there's really no way we can dive into every aspect of it during this webinar. But what we want to do is fly over it, give you some idea of what it's about, give you some idea of how to work with it, and then most importantly, from the second half of this webinar, to give you an opportunity to talk with us about it. So let me take a moment then to introduce our panelists. I'm joined today by some of my favorite people within the business. Sitting in our studio in Amsterdam are Simon van der Peer, you can call him Simon if you like. Also Jurt Kullery, so they're in Amsterdam. Then on the line with me are from my team, Diana Salk-Pollock. I probably said Paulson, I probably mispronounced it stupidly. Sorry, Diana, I'll buy you a coffee. Diana and I actually do work together, so I do know her name. It's just the nerves. And then, of course, Simone Kraus also joining us online, and an old friend of mine, Catherine, joining us from the UK. Thanks, Catherine, for being there. We also have on the chat, supporting with technical questions, 3 members from my team, Vickers Ross, Carl Morris, and Rick Derbyshire, who's from Lancashire. I also always get that confused, Derbyshire, Lancashire. Right. Thank you for those of you who've introduced yourself on LinkedIn. It's good to have you. Please let us know where you're from. It's very exciting for us. To the studio team, I'm seeing on chat that there's some echo. I don't know what that's about. I'm going to mute myself, my speakers at least for now, so that hopefully you can hear me properly. All right. So having done the introductions, I want to just start off by reaching out to my colleague Jurt. Jurt, you're a strategic advisor at our Netherlands office, where the studio also is. Thanks again for joining us. You're also, I think, one of the very few people I know who has actually read the Navigator from end to end, which is no small feat. Most of us don't have the time for that. So I just wanted to ask you briefly, like, what do you think the major topics are? If you could summarize for the people listening, what the major topics are that the Navigator engages in.
Yeah, thank you, Charl, and welcome to everybody on this call. The Security Navigator, as you mentioned, is like 180 pages thick. Well, that's an extensive report, and I'd rather call it a book. And if you treat a book with chapters, you could be treated a Security Navigator as a book as well, because it contains a lot of chapters as well. So treat the Security Navigator as a holistic approach, not as silos, but as chapters of the book. And when you correlate all the chapters of the book, you can easily imagine yourself a big picture that shows your digital attack surface, because all the chapters correlate together with them.
Thanks, Jurt. I appreciate it. As you said, it's a massive book. There are specific chapters. You can deep dive into those chapters. There's some chapters that give you an overview, and then there's other chapters that deep dive into specific topics where we try and address specific questions that we have in our minds. But you will see that there are threads that run through the entire report from end to end, as Jurt said. We're going to try and kind of highlight some of those for you. But in the end, you do kind of want to page through it all, I think, to get a sense of what those threads are. But Jurt, while I'm speaking to you, I wonder if I can ask you something specific about one of the topics that you mentioned. In fact, yourself and another friend of ours, Tamara, from the Netherlands, authored a chapter on cyber warfare. You talk about the definitions, the complexity of understanding what cyber warfare really is. But I guess my question is really more about why it matters to organizations. You know, I imagine that most of our listeners, most of our clients won't be involved in cyber war directly. So why is that even a topic that we need to address?
Well, I think we should be prepared for a global scale of impact on society. Cybersecurity is not only relying on technology. We are protecting society these days, and that's the big difference. And the intertwinedness of analog and digital technology is a fact. You see that cyber warfare is being used as a digital weapon to attack, counter-attack organizations and even countries. It's widespread. There are nation-state sponsored actors who are sympathizing with groups or affiliates or even performing hacktivism to cause havoc around the world. But organizations should also be aware that even though they might be not the subject, they could be the cause of collateral damage. So one country is attacking another country, and it's widespread because we live in an interconnected world, because everything is connected. So they might suffer from an attack from another country.
Yeah, I think, you know, something you mentioned in that chapter and when we were speaking earlier is something that my team and I really try and emphasize in our work, which is this notion of interconnectedness. You know, we've been taught with a risk mindset to try and assess what the probability and the impact would be of an incident on our business. But as the world continues to move digital and as technology plays a bigger and bigger part in our businesses, what we recognize is that we simply can't tease ourselves apart anymore. And I know it's a bit trite and cliche, but Orange, we talk about building a safer digital society. And that's not just kind of an aspirational quote. It's necessary because you can't have a safe individual or safe organization in a society that is not collectively safe. And it's because of this interconnectedness. So thanks for that, Jurt. I want to turn to you now, Simon. You're hiding in the corner there next to your colleague, Jurt. You're both strategic advisors. Simon, you're based in Belgium, also a very old friend and colleague. And obviously, as part of your job, you're dealing with our clients. And one of the things that my team and I and the other contributors to the Navigator hope is that the Navigator will become something that clients can use, that the market can use. And so I'm interested to hear from you your thoughts on how do you use it? How do you get value from this telephone book of charts and figures and insights?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me, Charl. I think that the customers can use the Security Navigator in many different ways, and I don't think we know all of them. And in my role as a strategic advisor, I provide high-level advice to our customers, and I use the Security Navigator as one of my most important sources. I get questions and challenges from customers ranging from security awareness among their people, understanding the cyber threat landscape, building security programs, or even consider how can we be more effective when we implement security controls. And let me take you through a few examples that I've faced myself. One is from an organization within finance and insurance. And this organization has a lot of people within IT, within security. They have system administrators, network administrators and engineers. They have analysts, programmers, and so on. All have a very specific challenge when it comes to their job and specific knowledge. Now, this organization wants to keep cyber threats on top of mind of all people within their team. So what they do on a regular basis is organizing threat calls where they share information among their people. And so we have taken the Security Navigator, distillated some information related to finance and insurance out of the Security Navigator. And what we then did was create a story to share that information. In this way, this client hopes to keep cyber threats on top of mind with all their people. They want to ensure they use it when they have to make decisions to see specific threats happening in their organization and be better prepared for response when they are facing one. And that's just one example. I recall another one from a local government. And this local government, they had already a security program in place, but they need to get approvals each time they want to add something new. In this case, it was a cybersoc. And they need to get approval from the council. So what we did was we took the Security Navigator and then took some information out there to build a business case so this person could go to the council and got approval for the next project. So just two ways as an example.
Simon, I understand that you've spoken directly to some clients also to ask them if or how they use it. I think it might be useful for other people also just to hear, what you're being told about how to apply the insights in the report.
Yeah, I found it quite interesting as well. So what I did in preparation was I picked up my phone and called a few customers. And I was calling a customer and he told me, well, I just finished reading the Security Navigator 2024. And he told me, well, the Security Navigator is one of the sources that I use to understand and be aware of the cyber threat landscape. And this person told me one thing in particular was quite interesting in the Security Navigator, and that was the section about vulnerability management, where vulnerability management can be more effective by using cyber threat intelligence information. So yet another way, another sector that uses the Security Navigator to their advantage.
I was speaking to a client yesterday, and also asking him about the Navigator, and he was telling me they don't read it, they study it. Mm-hmm. So I kind of have I have respect for the work that needs to happen to take a detailed report and turn it into something your business can actually action. And when I was talking to this client, we were talking about the challenge with complexity. The Navigator is a complex, detailed, technical document, and one of the things we want to do is try to kind of simplify things and make them clear and actionable for clients. And he was frankly supporting a view that I have, which is that sometimes you just can't do that. Sometimes a report can't simplify things because they are very simply complex issues and they need to be presented in a complex way. So there is a layer of work, I think, that needs to go into reading something like the Navigator and other reports of its kind, and then deciding for a specific context how how it is applied. But I'm gonna put you on the spot and give you a pop quiz. Imagine you had 5 minutes with the CISO. Make it 2 minutes. And the CISO says, okay, fine, you brought out this 180-page report. Name 3 things that you think are interesting about it. What would you tell him?
Yeah. Well, I would always try to tailor the message, of course, to the customer, to the type of organization of the CISO is working, because some topics are more impactful for others, like hacktivism is an example of that. It might be more impacting specific types of organizations than others. But if I need to pick 3 points, it would be in first place cyber extortion. We still see cyber extortion on the rise. Last year, there was something very remarkable. It was Klopp. They were able to exploit a 0-day multiple times, making a lot of victims. So cyber extortion and cyber extortionists, they keep having the means and the motives to impact any type of organization. We're talking about 0-day exploits. Exploits, it need to be patched, of course. Vulnerability management, as a second point, is an interesting topic, because dealing with 0-day exploits is challenging, but even dealing with known vulnerabilities is challenging. Our Security Navigator report of this year reaffirms that organizations only managed to patch 15% of the vulnerabilities. So there is a section in the Security Navigator that explains, okay, how can intelligence be of advantage to improve your vulnerability management strategies. And lastly, I think a topic concerning every CISO or every security professional: how can you prove return on investments of the investments you're making in cybersecurity? And our Security Navigator this year is handling in 2 different sections, CyberSOC, but as well as results from the penetration testers, that we see over time that the difficulty increases to breach, for example, an organization by our pen testers. So what it tells is it is improving the security in organizations, and you have a positive ROI over time.
I want to just stick on that topic with you for a moment, if I can, on this point about ROI. I think one of the things you're referring to is what we present in the Navigator as the threat detection maturity wave. We thought that the industry needed yet another wave, so we created one. I think this is one of the more interesting findings of the report, talking here specifically about threat detection, MDR, our CyberSOCs. Can you talk us through what this briefly what this chart explains?
Yeah. So this threat detection maturity wave, in first place, it learns us that after a period of 3 years, our customers are getting an efficiency rate of about 30% when it comes to true positive incidents that are confirmed ongoing malicious activities in the environment or the IT environment of our customers. If we look to 4 years or above, we see an efficiency rate of 45% or even higher. Now, this wave is showing a cycle, a kind of wave we're going through together with our customers. We start by analyzing some log sources, consider Active Directory, firewall logs, endpoint security logs, and so on, where we start searching for cyber threats. Each time we add an additional log source, we get a bunch of false positives that of course need to be tuned out, and then we get more efficient in detecting cyber threats. And over time, we do add additional log sources with additional information. And then we see that this wave is dropping for some time, and we start tuning once again over time. Now, this percentage you see on the screen, these are actually the confirmed true positive cases. Next to that, so the other cases is a combination of false positives and unknown or unclassified incidents, where we can become better if we get more feedback from our customers, and we can improve that. But over time, and after a period of 4 years, we see very good confirmed incidents and high efficiency. So it means that on those moments we have, over time, we get a better return on investment on the cybersecurity investment we have done, or our customers have done.
Thanks, Simon. Just to the studio a note, we seem to still be getting an echo. I'm not sure if there's something we can do about that. It's not too bad, but if we can maybe try and tone it down a bit, we appreciate it. Thanks. What we're going to do, folks, if you don't mind, particularly for the people who've joined us on GoToWebinars, we want to run a quick poll with you in the spirit of improving the Navigator and making it a resource that is useful to you. We want to run a quick poll and just ask you, what are the topics that you think you would like to see or see more of? Hearing back from you will really help us produce a resource that is of value to you ultimately. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to respond to that. If you're on GoToMeeting, respond to the poll for us, please. The people on LinkedIn unfortunately won't be able to respond to the poll, but we'll share the results for you when they come in. Now, while we're waiting for that, Jort, I wonder, just kind of maybe as a final question on the document itself, whether you could give us some thoughts on how you approach actually reading the document. So practically speaking, what's the strategy through getting through a report that's 180 pages long?
Yeah, as I said in the beginning, you should treat it as an holistic approach, as silos, and reading it as chapters. But what I've seen, and I've read many reports in the past, and many of the reports that are being published by our competitors, they do contain also the numbers and the figures that we publish from our managed security services. But what we also do is actually we tend to let the real security analysts, the ethical hackers, all kinds of specialists around the globe in the world, to write their own story, what they see these days in the field of cybersecurity. And that makes a big difference, because you see what's actually happening in the field of cybersecurity. And most interesting thoughts on how an ethical hacker has performed on a red team assessment with a special client, or how a security analyst has found out that there is a new attack in an environment that has never been seen before. So actual insights and actual information to have a look in your own organization, how you can use that as a next phase or step into your security maturity.
Thanks, Jort. I appreciate that. I think you make some valid points. The results from the poll are in. I'm going to ask Medina if she won't post them into LinkedIn so you can see what people responded. I'll give you the rundown. The clear winner is vulnerability management with 43%, and that's good news, because we're very interested in vulnerability management also. I'll speak to Catherine about that in a little bit, actually. Some of the insights that we provide around vulnerability management. We're particularly interested in prioritization and the role that threat intelligence or vulnerability intelligence plays in prioritization. Surprisingly, second is operational technology threats. That'll be good news to my colleague Rick. So he's assured of a job for a few more years. There's also, we do some significant work on that. So I'll pick up on that theme. That's followed by cyber extortion at 13%, cyber warfare at 11%, and hacktivism at 10%. I got to say, I mean, I see it, but I don't know if I would agree that those are necessarily the priorities, but I'll leave you to make your own mind up as we progress through this webinar. All right, so given that feedback, we got a set of questions on GoToWebinar about false positives. Do they change over time? Do we monitor the specific actions that lead to false positives? And what do false positives really mean? So that's a perfect opportunity actually for me to pose a question to Simone Kraus on that topic. Simone is a senior analyst in our detection, analysis, and response team. She supports customers in our Cyber Defense Center, based out of the CyberSOC in Germany. And she's also an active participant in the MITRE detection engineering community. So very much firsthand involved in this analysis of false positives and the management of false positives. So Simone, speaking again in the context of our threat detection centers and the incidents that we raise with our customers, we've noted over the years that the ratio of false positive to true positives is changing. We're seeing many more false positives or fewer true positives. Can you talk us through that a little bit, what it means and what it means to our customers?
Brilliant question, Charles. Thanks for having me here, everybody. So indeed, the Navigator shows that the proportion of the true positives from our incident tickets has decreased from 35% in 2020 to 19% in 2023. So in the first instance, a true positive incident is a very specific thing for us. We only flag incidents as true positives when we have specific and concrete verification that an alert indicated an actual security incident that help us also avoiding alert fatigue. So our data shows that the proportion of serious high priority alerts has increased from 15% to 32% over the same period. This suggests that the alerts are becoming more impactful. We see this because of the work that goes into triaging and analyzing the alerts. So the report claims that the detection efficiency improves again as clients mature with us. And we put that down to improved tuning and detection accuracy that comes from getting regular specific feedback with our clients. And this is very important too.
Simone, staying with that point, if I may, can you tell us a little bit about how that tuning happens on our side, and how that affects what our clients see in terms of the incidents that we report?
Yes, of course. We show that the efficiency means the proportion of true positive is only 9% for customers who begin onboarding of a new detection capability. This is the maturity that we were talking about and Simon mentioned, but increased to almost 50% by the time a client has worked with us for 4 years. So the efficiency of mature established clients can be 4 times higher than that of new clients. This is a normal process. We believe this client maturity is strongly expressed in the frequency with which we receive also the feedback on the incident we raise. The more regular and detailed feedback we receive, the better our tuning is and analysis, and the more detection efficiency improves. So that means not only the efficiency improves, but also more important, the trust in our cyber SOCs. From a threat-informed defense approach, improving detection engineering is also with defensive engagement measures very efficient, means that during the detection engineering process, we find invariant behavior of real-world attacks in our environments of our customers by testing it in the most realistic way with a breach and attack simulation tool, for example, or we emulating it specific enterprise-centric on a threat actor like CLOP or Lockbit, and we can write robust detection on specific commands or artifacts and behaviors. So this is very important for rapid improvement, and the goal is to find very early choke points where the threat actor can be stopped by prevention or mitigation, at least should be detected in a real attack as soon as possible. Such robust detection avoid false positive causing also alert fatigue.
I think it's a really interesting topic, Simon, and it's not, I mean, it's not security drama, but I think, you know, one of the things that the data shows us is that there's this real tension between the effectiveness of how much we detect and the efficiency, which is the tension between false positives and true positives. And obviously, as we add more rules, as we add more data sources, we are in a position to detect more. But at the same time, it seems to us very clear that the number of false positives is going to grow faster than the number of true positives. And that seems to almost be a kind of immutable law. It doesn't really matter where we look, we see the same pattern. And I think what the maturity wave that Simon was talking about earlier reflects is that the only way to improve efficiency while also maintaining effectiveness is through tuning. And the only way to do tuning is with continuous feedback. And that means we have to have a strong relationships with our customers. The security teams needs to have a strong relationships with the IT. There needs to be regular purple teaming. All of those things that close the loop, I think are really essential. So thanks for that. I want to pop across to a slightly different question, if I may, which is to do with some of the findings of that we get from the threat detection data. So what we're actually seeing, and maybe we can get the studio team to show this slide because I think it's quite interesting. It speaks about the number of incidents that are attributed to internal sources, so to internal users. You know, what immediately jumps to mind is the so-called internal threats. Can you talk us through this finding and just explain what we actually mean when we say internal, and what does this mean to people who are trying to manage these threats?
Yes, great question. So we've got malicious and non-malicious insider threats, and this insider or internal threats are classified by us with malicious 3%, mistaken 8%, negligent 16%, outsmarted 2%, and 11 unknown. And let us distinguish it between malicious and non-malicious insider threats. So we can also read this MITRE ingenuity defined malicious insider threats as those who seek to cause harm. So examples for malicious insider threats are espionage, IP theft, unauthorized disclosure could also be, like Simon mentioned, sabotage, fraud, or also what we see rising workplace violence. Then we've got the non-malicious insider threats. They are negligent if they cause harm through carelessness, means they are inattentive, for example, by ignoring warnings or downloading unwanted software. We see this very often also in the incident response. Then we've got the mistaken one. These are insider that cause harm through a mistake that is not necessarily attributed to carelessness. It could be, for example, pressing an incorrect button in a very stressful environment, like we also see in the OT environment, or outsmarted. This is maybe also the most common non-malicious insider, just phishing, outmaneuvered by an attack on adversary, new phishing attack that has not previously been seen in the wild, and other social engineering attempts.
I find this very interesting because, you know, we use this word threat. We talk about the insider threat, but and clearly there is a threat, right? There's a very real threat that an insider can be turned, manipulated, bribed, whatever, to, insert malware or perform some other malicious action. But what this data is suggesting is actually that the majority of the incidents we raise are, from the perspective of the actor, from the perspective of the insider, are benign, right? They didn't have malicious intent. They did something in a hurry.
Yes.
They made a small mistake. And even the numbers that speak to being outsmarted, so manipulated, is actually relatively small as a percentage of what we see attributed to insiders. The other thing that you said, which I think is very interesting because it touches on a passion of mine, is the role played by tension. And our response
Yes.
to social engineering as a threat has been very often to test and punish users. It happens to me. I click on the wrong link from time to time, and then I have to redo the training, and it takes 15 minutes of my life. And so it sort of raises anxiety almost. And I think something that is worth thinking about more isn't there a way to rather reduce the tension, give users space and time to concentrate, to think, to be mindful of what they're doing as a response to this threat. So I think that like these kinds of findings are actually quite useful in allowing us to orient around what otherwise sounds like quite a scary, dark, dangerous thing. Simon, thanks for that. I want to jump across, if I may, Catherine, to you. Catherine Bodie, as I said, joining us from the UK. She's the head of our Vulnerability Operations Center in Africa and the UK. From the poll, we theme for. And I wanted to speak to Catherine some of the stuff we talk about in the Navigator on the subject of vulnerability management. It's not a simple chapter, Catherine. I think we try to ask some hard questions, and I'm not sure that we entirely got our answers right. But I think it's a step in an important direction. Maybe the studio can show this CVSS versus EPSS slide up. But really, the inherent problem that I think we're trying to address in the Navigator is that we understand, and I think everybody knows, that vulnerabilities are increasing all the time, right? Every year is thousands and thousands of CVEs. So there's this tsunami of new things we have to worry about. We know from our data, and we've seen it supported by other people's data, that only about 15% of new vulnerabilities actually get patched. So, it almost doesn't matter how many come in, we're not going to get to them all. And at the same time, we know that only about 4 or 5% ever get exploited in the wild. So there's thousands of vulnerabilities. We're never going to patch them all, but only a handful of them are ever going to actually hurt us. And so the question we examine in the Navigator is, how do we strike the balance? How do we choose which 15% of the vulnerabilities we're going to patch? Which are the 5% that we can't afford to miss? How do we use the resources we have to counter those vulnerabilities that are really going to matter to us? And in the Navigator, we go through this process of evaluating different strategies by comparing their coverage. So how many vulnerabilities do they actually cover? Their efficiency, how many unnecessary vulnerabilities end up being patched, and then the level of effort required to pursue a kind of strategy. But of course, that's from a research point of view. So I'm interested in hearing from you, Catherine, your teams. What are you saying to your clients about how you prioritize vulnerabilities to patch and the role that threat or vulnerability intelligence plays in that specifically?
Thank you, Charl, and hello, everyone. So from my perspective, CVSS is definitely still the go-to for everyone when it comes to that initial scoring of a vulnerability. 99% of scanners still use this to show where the vulnerability sits within the severity scoring and provide that first initial insight for everyone. You've then got the EPSS, which can then help the customer prioritize this specifically to their environment based on the exploitability and focus initially in patching the vulnerabilities that can be exploited. We also use our World Watch service. All of our managed service customers have access to this, and that advises us of the most critical vulnerabilities in the wild. This really helps us to be proactive with our customers, especially when the likes of Log4j and the recent Ivanti 0-day that's happened. Another way we could also look at this, Charl, is there's actually no one answer to the question, as it can always depend on what the intelligence is being used for. Risk mitigation reduces the risk overall, and then you've got the threat mitigation. So this is about responding to something current and specific. These are the two objectives that customers really need to be pursuing in their environment. If we could just go to the next slide. This diagram will show the different strategies, metrics, and tactics that are required. So this involves applying attack intelligence, vulnerability intelligence, and threat intelligence differently. And regardless of what vulnerability intelligence, what threat intelligence, what attack intelligence we use, pursuing asset intelligence is always key. If the customers don't know what's in their environment, how can we help them with their vulnerabilities? Oh, sorry, Charl, I think you may have some problems with your microphone. You seem to be muted on our end.
Oh my goodness, I've been talking to myself, haven't I? Sorry, I'll
Yes,
shorten
you
that.
have.
I had myself on mute. My apologies, everyone. Basically, I think the point that I wanted to make here is when we examined as our team EPSS to determine if it's actually as effective as FIRST says in our client environments, the answer we came up with was basically it depends. It depends on what vulnerabilities you have to start with. It depends on what you consider to be the true source of information about what gets patched in the wild. And that makes it really hard to make a definitive assertion about, well, you know, use CVSS, use EPSS, use Mandiant's threat intelligence, use our threat intelligence, because it really differs. And I think your way of breaking it up into these different objectives, these different overall strategies is very useful because it allows you to then choose the right kind of intelligence for the problem you're trying to solve. And there are very different, you know, we talk holistically about vulnerability management as if it's one thing, but actually vulnerability management breaks down into a whole lot of disciplines, including, as you pointed out, risk reduction on the one side and threat mitigation on the other side. And those require different tactics and they require different intelligence. And while you may use the same intelligence sources, you're going to use them very differently and apply different metrics to achieve those goals. So for people on this call that are interested in vulnerability management, the chapter that we have on vulnerability management is not simple to read. I'm not going to lie to you, but I think it is worth dipping into because I think it presents us with some relatively valuable insights. Now, one person I haven't spoken to today is Diana Selk-Paulson. She's one of my favorite people to talk to, but also one of the people that scare me the most because she looks very hard and thinks very hard about the topics that interest her. Look at the scary face. And Diana has for several years now, almost 4 years, been focusing on the global issue of cyber extortion. And so I really want to, and starting with cyber extortion, but then branching out into other elements that touch on cyber extortion, like the effectiveness of law enforcement, or the overlap between cyber extortion and hacktivism, the impact of the Ukraine war on cyber extortion. These are all things Diana's been studying in a lot of detail. She's a criminologist by training, but also a very disciplined data analyst. So she's someone that I really love to listen to. And Diana, I'm going to hit you with 3 questions in a row, if that's okay. First, we use the term cyber extortion. Explain to us what cyber extortion is and how it's different from ransomware. Secondly, in the Navigator, we show very clearly that the cyber extortion numbers have exploded again in 2023 after a small dip in 22. Talk us through that, what it is, why it happened, and then finally, what does that mean to the people on this call who are actually responsible for responsible for managing security in their businesses?
Okay, a lot of questions. Thank you, Charl. Hi, everyone. So we referenced
Diana, I think you're also on mute.
I am. Okay, then I'm just waiting a little bit and talking until you can hear me. Can you? Yeah, okay, good. Yes, thank you, and hi, everyone. So cyber extortion, we say cyber extortion because when we started looking into the threat of ransomware, as it's often referred to, and still accurate, of course, we don't really feel that this is covering the whole thing that we're seeing, because ransomware encrypts systems and then ask for money to get the decryption key, and it's of course still something that we see, but we also see more extortion techniques being applied. For example, only exfiltrating data and then using data as a hostage, so data extortion. So we think cyber extortion, as an umbrella term to talk about both or several threats that we're seeing is more accurate. And then to your second question about what we've been seeing, in the last 12 months or longer. So we see a huge increase in 2023, and I think anyone who's observing that space would agree with us that we've never seen so high numbers. When we just look at victim numbers, and again, it's just a partial view. So the victims that we're tracking, they are the end stage, so the ones that have not come to an agreement with threat actors, the ones that have not chosen to pay, end up on the so-called leak sites on the dark web. The reason why we see 2023 is so high is actually a question for the year before. So we actually need to look in 2022 to explain that, because if we zoom out to the whole time that we have been monitoring that threat, we actually see that year by year this is an increasing threat, except 2022. Something happened in 2022, and 2022 is actually the anomaly, and 2023 is just has continued as it looked like early 2 years ago. And I think we have a slide for that where we look at the years of the threat actor activity, and that kind of shows. That one works. The one that you might see now in a minute. Otherwise, there is another one that shows per year. So what that means is now in 2023, the high number of victims that we see, we actually see patterns from 2 years ago, because in 2022, the war against Ukraine began. We're actually almost very close to 2 years in war, and something disrupted that ecosystem for a year. And that's why we see or saw a decrease in 2022. We think, threat actors have been displaced, and 2022 has been the anomaly. Now we're back to the patterns from the year before the war. We see more English-speaking countries being impacted. We see, if we look at the year per month, we see every month, every quarter, more victims. We've seen that kind of pattern before, except in 2022 when the war began against Ukraine. And then now, actually, just this week, I analyzed the Q4 data that we've gotten in. We don't have that for the Navigator report. So now we have a year-on-year comparison. So it really illustrates the increase that we've seen. So we've actually, when we say, okay, let's skip 2022, let's look at 2021, which was normal, and now at 2023, we actually see 75% increase of victims. That's a lot. So over 4,000 victims in 2023. 2023 that we know of. But we only see an 8% increase of the threat actors or the leak sites that have published those victims. And that's big news because that means that the ecosystem that we're looking at is extremely effective. Not so many more have actually participated, but they have caused much more victims that we've ever seen before. And to your third question, why it matters is, obviously it's a very successful crime that we're observing, and we kind of need to understand that as good as we can. And what we see is that it's very opportunistic. We study the victimology quite closely, I would say, closer than anyone else. But we can't see any patterns. We can see maybe some geopolitical events that might have impacted the victimology in a certain way. And we learn from the insights from the past, or who's impacted in region and country, in industry, in business size, for example. But we can't predict the future based on that. That's a difficult one. And as we've talked already today about vulnerabilities, 2023 has been the year of vulnerabilities also for cyber extortion ransomware. We've seen the threat actor group club using 2 vulnerabilities and, uploading masses of victims on their site. So yeah, I guess it means, again, it's a very opportunistic crime that we're looking at. We need a multi-layered approach, and we have to say, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And that comes down to your cybersecurity practices in all ways, and all attack vectors that we know of.
I lost my screen there for a moment. Thanks, Diana.
Mm-hmm.
So folks, I'm going to open the floor up for questions from you. I've got several more questions I'd like to ask. But there are 2 forums, please, that you can use to ask us questions. The one is on GoToWebinar. There's a questions pane. Please, add your questions there, and we'll do our best to address them either here or in the panel itself. And then the other is on LinkedIn. There's a comment section on LinkedIn. I see many of you have introduced yourselves there. Thanks for that. Please continue to drop your questions and comments there, and we'll try and address them as we go along. There's a couple of questions here that I feel like I can perhaps try and answer, but I'm just going to put it out there to the other panelists, Simon and Jut in particular. I think you may have views on this. And there's a set of questions that asks about the impact of AI. And these questions drive me nuts. I get asked about AI all the time. But the questions are basically, how is AI being used by attackers on the one hand, and then on the other hand, how do we use AI to address false positives? So maybe if there's, to avoid confusion, I can put this question to you, Simon. How is AI being used by attackers? Is it a big deal? And number 2, how are we using AI to manage false positives and streamline our work?
Very good question. AI has many capabilities for the good and for the bad. As we see today, we are aware of some cases where AI is being used in the initial attack vector, where phishing and very well drafted phishing emails with the help of tools like ChatGPT is well adopted by cyber criminal organizations to better get positive success ratios on the phishing emails they send out. But we start to see exactly similar things today in the social engineering part, where there are For example, calls or videos being sent out by people working in the organization, kind of deep fakes to ensure they can get the attention of their victims to get a malware implanted in the organization or those kind of things. At the same time, in the cybersec, we are using artificial intelligence technologies to improve detection capabilities, because artificial intelligence allows us to analyze just more data and find anomalies in there. But maybe Simone is better placed to add something on that topic in particular. And then Jort, is there anything you see happening today in the cyber warfare landscape?
Within cyber warfare, I think it's with every technique that is being developed. The evolution of technology will be closely followed by cybercrime or cyber warfare. Just an example, we invented encryption to masquerade our data, to protect our data, and now encryption is being used to ransom us. The same counts for all new technology that will be developed in the coming years. It will be used as a funny thing, such as a deepfake, and in the end, it will end up in something badly in the world. And as Simon said before, the AI techniques will become much more smarter, efficiently, and will be very dangerous for the humankind.
Thanks both. Yeah, I think our house view on the use of AI by attackers is basically to say, watch the space. Well, we think the evolution is still happening. We think the long-term implications are still revealing themselves. We're not particularly excited by the sort of short-term deepfakes. That doesn't seem very new to me, actually. And from a defense point of view, yes, there's technologies that use not so much AI, but machine learning to improve our efficiency. We use it in many of the technologies we deploy. But again, I wouldn't say it's game changing. My feel is it's like more of an evolution than a revolution. But Simon, you mentioned that Simone may have some insights into this. And actually, there's some other questions to Simone about data sources. Simone, which are the most useful ones? And then I think there's a question that sort of goes along the lines, are there log sources or detection technologies that are particularly useful to small businesses?
That's a great question and a complex question, but I try to answer it. From the perspective of sensor mapping, it depends. So which logs do you have in your system? But the most useful is on the operating system side, the Windows logs, for example, that you've got, or the logging that you got already in place. And then from the threat-informed defense perspective, also to do the defensive measure means if you can mitigate, you mitigate and prevent, or you try with detection engineering to find out which logs do I have in place. So you do an assessment regarding also MITRE mapping. If you've got a threat profile, if you know which threat actors are relevant, then you also know, okay, which are the most prevalent MITRE attack techniques maybe. And from that perspective, you do the research on the MITRE attack technique where you've got the data sources, and from the data sources, you know then, okay, regarding my operating system or my IDS IPS system, I can map it. I can do the sensor mapping. I need this event logs, and if I do not know if I've got them in the right place or if they are already working, I try with defensive engagement, testing and evaluating it to improve my security posture.
I think what's interesting to me, Simone, about what you do and this whole detection engineering, threat-led defense mindset is that it's inherently about agility. And I think for all of us in cybersecurity, sadly, whether you're a big client or a small client, whether you're dealing with detecting threats, mitigating threats, or or patching vulnerabilities. We all need to get into the space where we develop an inherent agility. We want to know these are the 3 things you have to do, and everyone wants to tell you, here's the top 5, here's the first 3. But I think realistically, the landscape changes so fast that the real capability you have to develop is the ability to intuit, to understand, to perceive that something is changing, either in your organization or in the threat landscape, and respond to that. And I think, Simone, that's what you do every day. Catherine, I think that's what the vulnerability intelligence gives us. But I think it's also sadly the answer to the question, what's the best or what's the first, is that it's not easy to come up with one answer for that. I've got some questions on cyber extortion, Diana, that I'd like to push your way if I can. And the first is a very specific one. It's about whether we see insiders being used to perform ransomware or deploy ransomware for cyber extortion. So maybe we can talk about that quickly, and then I've got another bigger question that I want to ask you.
Sure. Just checking. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. That's an interesting one. It's nothing that we come across very often. So if you look at the attack vectors, commonly used for ransomware cyber extortion, no, we don't see much insiders. But I remember that maybe 2 years ago or so, we've seen new techniques, and that was looking for insiders for specific companies and offering financial incentives. So I think it's an option. It just hasn't been very visible to us lately.
Thanks, Diana. There's also a question about which regions or industries we see cyber extortion growing in the most, or where it's the most prevalent. And maybe the studio can throw that slide up for us. I believe it's slide 58. If the studio can show slide 58. Diana, maybe you can talk us through that.
Yeah, sure. So the most impacted, I think it really depends a little bit how you look, whether on absolute numbers and the most volume or the most increase in percentage. So we see, of course, English-speaking countries mostly impacted in 2023. So we're back to the trend what we've seen in 2021, as I mentioned before. So it's the US and Great Britain, Canada, Oceania, which actually we had like second highest increase. So that would be Australia, New Zealand. By percentage, we've actually seen India the most. Very interesting finding. I haven't seen much about it in external reports, though again, the numbers are small. We've been analyzing that trend a little bit, and we think it's due to wealth and economy, because we've argued in the past that if we would have to find a reason why specific countries or regions are impacted, it might be wealth. India is one of the fastest growing economies, so maybe there's a reason now to approach them. And also, as we just talked a little bit about AI and technology and developments, culture and language has always been determined as well. You need to kind of know what you're looking at. You need to understand what you've compromised and what your leverage is. And we think that that is the reason why English-speaking countries are in the run. But for the very near future, that might change, because we have now ChatGPT and other technologies to help us cross or overcome that barrier of language. And otherwise, I think if this slide is still showing, you also see that every region that we're looking at has seen an increase. So again, it's because of the volume that we've seen in 2023, except China. It really has just been huge volumes there. And I think industry is very similar. We see increases almost everywhere. And I think if you want a detailed overview, but I see actually it's coming on the screen now as well. Then check out the Navigator. Again, we've seen increases in all of the industries except retail. We don't have an explanation for that specific industry. It's sometimes sometimes there is none, or sometimes there's one that is not available to us. We've seen over 100% increases in education. We've seen a lot of increase in information sector, in healthcare. Healthcare is an interesting one where we're probably going to dive into in the very near future. Back 2 years ago, we've had rules, or not we, but threat actors had rules to not impact healthcare. And now that seems to have changed. We see actually a lot of healthcare impacted. We see a lot of hospitals impacted from that sector. So again, check out the report because we've given several analysis to the sectors there.
Thanks, Diana. Folks, I'm aware that we've run out of time. My time management skills, as always, are less than perfect. And we still have a long list of questions that we can address. So what I'm going to offer for those of you who are interested, and for my panelists who can, is that we stay on and tackle some of these questions. We're happy to talk about it ad nauseum. So keep the questions coming. If you have some time to spend with us, please stay, and we'll try and address as many of the questions as we can. Diana, I'd like to stay with you, actually, if I can, because there's another whole range of questions around the cyber extortion problem. Erwin, for example, asks about the drop in 2022, and then it looked like to some of us that maybe we'd broken the back of cyber extortion. It's looking better. We've got it under control. It's the beginning of the end, and 23 happens, and as your numbers showed, it's record. I don't know what the total growth is now, but it's remarkable. Tell us a little bit about why you think it is that we can't get cyber extortion under control collectively and internationally.
Yeah, that's a question that I've been asking as well quite a lot. Yeah, so as I mentioned in the beginning, so 2022 was quite different, and that's one of the reasons, why we see so much increase. It's also that, it has become quite political. Cyber extortion has always been financially motivated, and beginning with the war against Ukraine, we've seen that actually change, and it has continued like this. No? So we see actually a lot of crossovers in between, financially motivated and politically motivated actors. One of the major operations closed down and rebranded later on, and I think that's also one explanation for the dip in 2022, and I mean Conti by that. But then another thing to that is why is there such an increase, and why haven't we become better in stopping that? And we've actually looked at this from 2 different perspectives. So if you look at the ecosystem itself, it's actually very fast moving, and I think we have a slide for that shows why we have difficulties disrupting that ecosystem. We've done an analysis to look at changes in between years. So we actually took 3 years, and we checked, okay, from 2021, which actors are still active in 2022, and that is the 2022 bar that you might have seen on the screen, or are seeing on the screen. And then we have done the same with 2023. And we actually see that, we see a lot of threat actors that are still active from the year before. So there's not much change there. They are persistent. But then we see a lot of operations closing operations. So, they're stopping, and they're probably rebranding, or something else has happened. And we've seen a lot of new operations that we haven't seen the year before. So a lot is happening there. And then we started to look into lifespan. How long are those, operations actually active? And we found that, over half of them, so 54%, if I recall correctly, are just under 6 months active. and that's a challenge in itself, because it means, until we realize that this is a problem, until we realize that they've been very active in causing a lot of victims, they are already gone, and rebranding or doing whatever they need to do in that moment. So that's one, the ecosystem that is just hard to challenge and seems to be very resilient. And then from looking at law enforcement responses, for example, so what is law enforcement doing as a potential defender or disruptor for this crime? We actually see much more activity in that space very recently, and again, we have a slide for that where we focus on law enforcement activities. So we looked into trying to summarize what we're seeing in that space, and we haven't really found a data set by someone else. So we built it our own, and we looked at news coverages that addresses cybercrime and addresses cybercrime or like law enforcement action that is attempting to disrupt a form of cybercrime. And we actually see that, by the end of 2022, we see a lot of activity in that space. And we actually also, when we look at what type of cybercrime has been addressed, it's actually CyX that has been addressed the most. So 15% of the law enforcement activities that we have collected is actually CyX, and then, of course, other forms of cybercrime that exists. But we see then we went further and we went into, okay, but what are the actions? What's the type of action that law enforcement is doing to address this? And here we've seen that it's mostly arrests. So 40% is arrests and then sentencing. So that is good. It kind of leads us example. It gives a message that crime and cybercrime in particular is not without consequences. But again, the effectiveness of that is nothing that we see right now. And I think if you see the slide, the pie chart types of defense activities, if you see that right now, you also see that takedowns, for example, so 15% of the actions were takedowns. That's really good. Sanctions is really good. Seizures are really good. So we see much more in this space. And I think, in the last 12 months, we've seen two impressive activities. The first one is Hive. A year ago, last January, they have been infiltrated for several months. That has given us great insights, in the actual numbers of victims that we actually see. And it has actually shown offensive capabilities, hacking back capabilities by law enforcement. And then we've seen another attempt just now in December, where the one of the operations that has been very active, Black Cat, has been inactive for a week, and everyone has been speculating what's going on. And at the end, it turned out FBI and others, and so law enforcement was involved. But then, unfortunately, they unseized themselves just a few days after, I believe it was. So they are up and running. So that shows, again, challenges to law enforcement, for law enforcement. And once again, it shows how resilient they are and how hard it is to disrupt them.
Thanks, Diana. I think it's really interesting and important work. Catherine, I know you have to go in a few minutes, but I wonder if I can forward one more question to you from the audience. It's from Anders Anderson, which is one of the coolest names I've ever heard. And Anders asks about a chart that we showed last year regarding internal product vulnerabilities by security vendors. And of course, this year has once, and that is something we did in 22. It's not something we've done this year in the report, but it is a theme that we follow all the time. And of course, the most pressing thing at the moment, one of the big dramas of the security landscape at the moment is the Ivanti and Fortinet vulnerabilities that are being exploited in the wild. Resulting in a US government directive to actually remove Ivanti products from federal agency networks. I wonder if you could comment for us a little bit about this, the complexity of navigating and managing vulnerabilities in security vendor products.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Charl. I think the Ivanti crisis is one that we can definitely say about the issues that we have. I think one big complexity is obviously we have to rely on the vendors to actually release the fix. This could be whether we're waiting for the scanner to release the technology to detect the vulnerability, or whether it's the vendor to release a patch or solution to fix it. We're on Valentine's Day now, and the Ivanti issue was announced at the beginning of January, I think, properly. And even now, there's still different patches that are being released, and customers are still vulnerable. And from that, the customer's mindset they always go into a panic when this sort of thing happens. They're always on our case. You must fix this as soon as possible. And 9 times out of 10, it turns out that actually they've already patched to what they need to, or they don't even have the software or hardware that's vulnerable. It's because of such chaos and crisis that's been caused by a 0-day or a critical vulnerability or a CVSS score of 10 that does affect how vendors and people react to it.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, the issue of vulnerabilities in security products is obviously a big concern to us as a company. Through our managed services, with our intelligence and CCERT capabilities, we were able to mitigate the Ivanti threat, I think, very efficiently and very successfully. Mm-hmm. But I think we really feel our customers shouldn't have to depend on us to to help them with these issues. And so, just as an FYI, my team and I are looking very hard at the moment at what the sort of economic and societal and systemic factors are that put us in this place to begin with. What are the market forces that create a reality where we spend, as you said, the first 6 weeks of the year mitigating a threat that emerges from a product that's supposed to secure us. And if it was the first time, we could look at it as an anomaly, but it's not the first time. It's been happening over and over again. And it needs to get better. The question is, like with so many things in security, how do we make it better? But I think for our clients, in the meantime, the answer is the same as managing vulnerabilities in any other product. Know what you have, use the right vulnerability intelligence, have the processes in place, make sure your stuff is not end of life, etc. I just wanted to remind people again, me and my team, there are still some people on the call. In fact, there's a few hundred people still on the call. So if you do have other questions, if there's topics that interest you that you'd like us to dive into, please let us know. We're happy to do that with you. Yeah, we can be around for another 15 minutes or so. I wonder if, with that in mind, as we say goodbye to you, Catherine, and thank you to you, I wonder if I can come back to you, Simone, for another question around OT, because OT was one of the topics that was raised and that we didn't actually talk about yet today. Do you think you would be comfortable to just provide us with a brief summary of what it is that we're saying on the topic of OT in the Navigator? There's only a few more minutes left, so not too much, but I think there's a very interesting set of findings in the Navigator on the topic of operational technology security that may be of interest to listeners who have to deal with that kind of threat.
Yes, of course, I can do brilliant. I like to mention Rick Derbyshire. He does outstanding research in your team. So he does also the outstanding research on the Deadman's PLC, and it's part of the Security Navigator. It's talking about the categories that OT cyber attacks have, and then also the research the last 35 years that we can see what's going on in the OT environment. For example, Rick defines several categories. Category 1 attacks, for example, on the level 5 and 4 Purdue, that you see that most of the cyber criminals are attacking, around about 60%, then which are for all incidents purposes in IT attacks, but due to the fact that they do not utilize any OT-specific knowledge or TTPs. However, they can, through collateral damage and circumstances or opportunities, cause also harm to the OT. And then we've got the category 2 attacks. They include specific knowledge. For example, only 13% of the attacks are from nation-state threat actors, also very interesting to know. And these may either be crude attacks or ungraceful use, exploitation of frameworks and tooling, or they may be sophisticated attacks that, like we see with the nation-state threat actors utilizing process comprehension to expertly affect the OT. And then we've got the initial access that could be also vulnerabilities. We were talking today about it, or we see it, for example, also with APT28, the phishing emails in the IT environment, trying to get to the OT environment. And it has also changed within the last years regarding the Ukraine conflict, of course. So we see the shift of actor types since 2018 in the OT environment. We found that criminals were the most frequent, but also the changes of, for example, the kinetic and non-kinetic behavior during the Ukrainian war as a preparation, for example, to establish persistence and waiting until the day and then attacking the OT environment.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, I agree with you. I think the work that Rick has done here is really extraordinary. And like any good research, it presents as a very simple picture in the end, but I think that picture belies a whole lot of complexity and value. If I could ask the studio to put slide 116 up. It kind of shows a summary, I think, of what you were saying, Simone. So what we do in the Navigator is to categorize OT attacks, both in terms of the complexity of the attack and which element or which layer of the OT technology stack was actually impacted. And then we track the changes in those variables over time. And the conclusion that Rick reaches is ultimately that up to now, overwhelmingly, when we talk about attacks or incidents affecting OT, what we're actually talking about is incidents affecting IT, which had some sort of knock-on effect on OT. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. If you're a security professional concerned with managing risks in an OT space, that we realize that most of what we're seeing so far is not actually attacks impacting OT, it's attacks impacting IT. Now, that's not to say attacks impacting OT are not possible or that OT is not very vulnerable. Of course, that's true. But historically and up to today, where we see activity, it's accelerated massively in the last 4 years since 2020. That acceleration corresponds with the cyber extortion threat, which Diana is monitoring. And what we're seeing overwhelmingly is actually attacks in which IT is impacted and which then have some sort of knock-on effect on OT. What Rick then goes on to argue in the report is that what is required for that behavior to change is for criminals to develop, or even hacktivists, and possibly even nation-state actors to develop if you like, quote unquote, business model, which justifies the effort that is required by an attacker to pivot to hacking OT. And one business model which presents itself very obviously is the cyber extortion business model. So, one of Rick's hypotheses is that if there were a viable way to ransom an OT operation so that control can be taken from the legitimate owner until a payment is made and then returned to that owner once the payment is made, that would constitute a tipping point for cybercrime in OT environments. And in fact, in May this year, and I think a little bit earlier, March in this year, Rick will be presenting a model he calls Dead Man's PLC, which illustrates exactly how that is possible. Thank you, Simone, for that. Folks, I'm going to give us 5 more minutes until past the hour, and there are just a few kind of unusual edge questions that I think we can tackle. One is for, I don't know, maybe Simon, you have a view, or Jort has a view. It's questions around the Pegasus spyware. So this is obviously the spyware developed, I believe, by NSO Group in Israel, which targets and compromises mobile phones and then can be used as a rootkit to Trojan horse on the mobile phone. It's of course been used largely by nation states of ill repute to persecute or prosecute enemies of the state, journalists, journalist activists, political adversaries, etc. Do either of you have a thought on that issue?
I think it's a very difficult question. We always talk about open source and closed source, but how can you ensure closed source is closed source? The challenge with Pegasus software is that it was developed for a specific platform, and it was very successful. So it got through the security controls of the mechanism of that platform. I think on the future and on the longer scale, what Simon also said in terms of AI, it could be very challenging in the near future to overcome such software on platforms, on mobile platforms, desktops. So it will be very hard to distinguish what's legitimate and what's not.
Thanks, Jort. I agree with you. We actually touch on Pegasus in the Navigator, or more broadly on the issue of threats against mobile devices. Obviously, our umbrella company, Orange, is a mobile phone network operator, and so we're concerned about threats against mobile phones. And so we've been watching the space quite closely. And in summary, and perhaps I think, folks, this is going to have to be on a closing note. In summary, what we're saying is this: the Pegasus incident shows us very clearly that capabilities exist through which up-to-date, fully patched, modern mobile phones can be targeted and exploited remotely with little or no interaction from the end user. Now, those capabilities are very expensive at the moment and hard to come by, but they exist. Secondly, we argue, and we think this is a tenable argument, that when capabilities emerge at a nation-state level, there is a waterfall effect, and we can anticipate that those capabilities are going to find their way down into other ecosystems like the cybercrime ecosystem. So what exists today only for nation states will eventually be accessible to cyber criminals. And then thirdly, we're arguing that an enormous amount of corporate value is moving from the enterprise network to the mobile network. And beyond that, also to the mobile device. Beyond that, the mobile device has become a absolutely key element of our security stacks, right? It's where biometrics happens, it's where SMS OTP happens, it's where we get our emails for password resets,
It's where MFA runs. So we think that the mobile phone is going to become a core target, a core part of the attack surface, not only for nation states, but also for cyber criminals. And because of the whole closed-in nature of the mobile space, we actually have very poor control or visibility over mobile devices as enterprise security teams. That's a concern for us. We don't think that that's a burning concern. So for most enterprises, unless you're likely to be targeted by a nation state, 2024 is probably not the year that mobile phones get hacked, but certainly 25, 26 maybe. So we think that's a space that's a threat that's emerging and that people need to prepare themselves with.
Yeah, and,
and that, folks, brings us to past, and I think all that remains then for me is to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. If we haven't answered your question, please stay in touch, reach out, let us know. We'd love to continue engaging with us. And please watch this space for further webinars on the Navigator. We're going to be talking about OT. We're going to be talking about cyber extortion. We've got deep dives into different facets of the Navigator if you're interested in them. So stay in touch, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, watch your emails, and we'd be happy to continue sharing and talking about this report with you. Have a wonderful day, and on behalf of myself, the panelists, and the team at Orange Cyberdefense, thank you very much for joining us.